The Royal Guards are famous for their strict discipline and unshakable presence. They stand tall and motionless, dressed in their elegant uniforms, watching over royal palaces with sharp focus. Tourists from all over the world come to see them, fascinated by their ability to remain still, no matter what happens around them. People make funny faces, try to make them laugh, or even talk to them, but the guards never react. Their job is not just about standing still, it is about protecting the royal family with complete dedication and showing the highest level of professionalism. On this particular day, the sun shone brightly over the historic palace grounds. A large crowd gathered near the gates, eager to take pictures and witness the famous changing of the guard ceremony. The atmosphere was lively, filled with chatter, laughter, and the clicking of cameras. Some children, excited to see the guards up close, pointed at them in amazement, whispering to their parents about how cool they looked. Among the crowd was an elderly man sitting in a wheelchair, wearing a neatly pressed military uniform. His chest was decorated with shining medals, each telling a story of bravery and sacrifice. His family stood beside him. His daughter held his hand gently, while his grandson looked up at him with admiration. The old man's eyes sparkled with both pride and nostalgia as he gazed at the guards. It had been years, decades even, since he had worn his own uniform in service of his country. Now he was just another visitor, but in his heart, he still felt like a soldier. As his daughter wheeled him closer, the crowd began to notice him. Some people stepped aside, making room for him to have a clear view. A few kind strangers gave him respectful nods, understanding that this was no ordinary visitor. His presence alone commanded silent respect. The royal guards, as always, remained still, their eyes fixed straight ahead. They showed no reaction to the old soldier's presence. Their training had taught them to stay focused, no matter the situation. But something was different this time. Though they did not move or speak, there was an invisible energy in the air, a silent acknowledgement of the veteran's sacrifices. The old man raised his head proudly, his fingers twitching slightly, as if remembering the countless salutes he had given in his younger days. His grandson noticed this and whispered, "Grandpa, do you think they see you?" The veteran smiled softly, but said nothing. Then something unexpected happened. One of the guards, tall, young, and rigid in posture, slightly shifted his gaze. It was only for a brief second, but it was enough to break the routine. The crowd barely noticed, but those closest to the veteran did. His daughter gasped quietly, realizing what had just occurred. And in that moment, the air seemed to change. Something special was about to happen, something no one had expected. The crowd outside the palace gates continued to grow, with visitors eagerly waiting to witness the famous changing of the guard. Cameras were raised, capturing every moment, while children sat on their parents' shoulders for a better view. The royal guard stood in perfect formation, their uniforms crisp, their faces expressionless. They had done this countless times before, each movement precise and rehearsed. Nothing was supposed to break their discipline. But today was different. The elderly veteran in the wheelchair sat quietly, watching the guards with deep admiration. His chest rose and fell with slow breaths, and though he did not speak, his eyes held countless memories. Decades ago, he had worn a uniform too, standing tall just like these young soldiers. He had once known what it felt like to serve with honor, to follow orders, and to protect something greater than himself. Though his body had aged, his spirit remained strong. His daughter noticed the way he looked at the guards and gently squeezed his hand. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked softly. The old man nodded, but there was something in his expression, something unspoken. He wasn't just watching the guards. He was remembering. His grandson, a curious boy no older than 10, stood beside him, eyes wide with excitement. "Grandpa, were you a soldier too?" he asked eagerly. The veteran smiled. "Yes, a long time ago." "Did you ever stand like them?" The boy pointed at the guards. A soft chuckle escaped the old man's lips. "Not quite like them, but I stood with my brothers in arms. And just like these young men, I followed my duty." The boy's eyes sparkled with admiration. To him, his grandfather had always been a hero, but now, seeing him in his uniform with medals shining proudly, he truly understood. As the family stood together, a few other visitors noticed the veteran. Some nodded respectfully, while others whispered among themselves, realizing they were in the presence of someone who had served their country. A quiet understanding spread through the crowd. They weren't just looking at another tourist. They were looking at a man who had given a part of his life to something bigger than himself. The guards, as always, remained motionless. But then, something subtle happened. One of them, the same guard who had briefly shifted his gaze earlier, stood just a little bit straighter. Though he did not move his head, there was a new awareness in his posture. He had seen the veteran. He had noticed the medals, the uniform, the pride in the old man's eyes. And though he could not break protocol, something within him stirred. The veteran inhaled deeply, his hands twitching slightly, as if he wished he could stand once more. He didn't expect recognition. He didn't expect anything at all. But the respect he felt in that moment, even in silence, was enough. Something special was about to happen. The veteran sat quietly in his wheelchair, his hands resting on his lap. His eyes remained fixed on the royal guards, their uniforms crisp, their posture perfect. He had seen many parades and ceremonies in his lifetime, but today felt different. There was something special in the air, something unspoken yet powerful. His grandson stood beside him, still filled with curiosity. "Grandpa, do you think they know you were a soldier too?" the boy asked in a whisper, as if afraid to disturb the moment. The old man smiled but didn't answer right away. His medals shimmered under the sunlight, a quiet reminder of his service. He had never sought recognition for what he had done. Serving his country had been an honor in itself. But deep down, a part of him wondered, would these young men in uniform understand what it meant to dedicate your life to something bigger than yourself? Then, something unexpected happened. One of the guards, standing closest to where the veteran was seated, subtly shifted his gaze. It was only for a brief second, so quick that most people wouldn't have noticed. But the old soldier did. A trained eye recognized even the smallest details. That tiny movement spoke volumes. The crowd continued to watch, unaware of the silent moment passing between the two men, one young and standing tall, the other old and sitting with quiet dignity. The veteran's daughter, standing beside him, noticed too. Her eyes widened slightly, realizing what had just happened. "Dad, did you see that?" she asked softly. The old man simply nodded. His heart swelled with an emotion he hadn't expected to feel that day. The guard, of course, remained in position, his training demanding absolute discipline. But there was now something different in the way he stood. It was almost as if he wanted to do more, to acknowledge the presence of the man who had come before him, the man who had once stood in a different uniform, protecting his country in a different time. The moment passed quickly, but it left a lasting impact. The veteran's eyes glistened, not with sadness, but with pride. He didn't need words. He didn't need applause. That brief glance had said everything. His grandson tugged at his sleeve. "Grandpa, I think they know." The old man chuckled, patting the boy's hand. "Maybe they do." The sun continued to shine over the palace, the guards still standing tall, the crowd still watching. But for one veteran, one soldier who had given his youth to serve, that one silent recognition meant more than any ceremony ever could. And though the guard quickly returned to his rigid stance, something told the veteran that this was not the end. Something more was about to happen. Something no one expected. The crowd outside the palace gates remained still, their eyes fixed on the royal guards as they stood tall and motionless. For years, these guards had been a symbol of discipline and unwavering focus. No matter how many tourists tried to distract them, they never moved, never smiled, never reacted. Their duty was clear, to remain professional at all times. But today was different. The elderly veteran sat in his wheelchair, his hands gently folded in his lap, his gaze locked onto the guards. The brief moment of silent recognition from one of them had touched his heart in a way he hadn't expected. He thought that was it, just a simple, quiet exchange between two soldiers from different generations. But something inside him told him there was more to come. Then the unthinkable happened. One of the guards, the same one who had subtly shifted his gaze, suddenly stepped forward. His movement was precise, controlled, and unmistakable. Gasps spread through the crowd. This was not part of the usual routine. The other guards remained still, their discipline unbroken, but this one soldier had made a choice to do something out of the ordinary. The veteran's daughter gripped the handles of the wheelchair tightly. "Dad, he's coming forward," she whispered in disbelief. The old man's breath caught in his throat. His hands trembled slightly, but not from weakness. This was something else. This was respect, honor, and recognition in its purest form. The young guard stopped just a few feet away from the veteran. He did not speak. He did not smile. But what he did next left everyone in awe. With a smooth and deliberate motion, he lifted his sword. The blade, polished and gleaming under the sunlight, was raised in a perfect salute. It was a gesture of deep respect, one that broke every rule of the usual routine. The crowd fell silent. Even the tourists, who had been chatting and taking photos, realized they were witnessing something truly special. No one dared to move. No one wanted to interrupt the moment. The veteran, overwhelmed with emotion, felt tears well up in his eyes. Slowly, with a trembling hand, he raised it to his forehead and returned the salute. His movements were slower now, not as sharp as they once were, but the meaning behind them was just as strong. For a moment, it felt as if time had stopped. There were no words exchanged, yet the message was clear. This was a soldier's salute, a sign of deep respect from one serviceman to another across generations. The veteran's grandson looked up in awe. "Grandpa, he's saluting you," he whispered. The old man smiled through his tears. "Yes, son, he is." And in that moment, it didn't matter that one was young and the other was old. It didn't matter that they had served in different times, in different places. What mattered was the bond between them, a bond that only true soldiers could understand. For a few seconds, the world seemed to stand still. The royal guard, dressed in his perfect uniform, held his sword high in salute. The elderly veteran, sitting in his wheelchair, had returned the gesture with a trembling but proud hand. It was a moment of pure respect, one that did not need words. The crowd, which had been lively just moments ago, was now silent. Everyone was watching, completely drawn into the scene before them. Some had their phones raised, capturing the moment, while others simply stared, touched by the unspoken honor between the two men. The veteran's daughter wiped a tear from her cheek. She had never seen her father like this before. He had always been strong, always humble about his service, never asking for recognition. Yet here he was, being honored by a soldier from a new generation, standing in front of a royal palace for all to see. The young guard, after holding the salute for a few seconds longer, smoothly lowered his sword and stepped back into his position. His face remained emotionless, his posture as disciplined as ever, but everyone who had witnessed the moment knew it was more than just a simple movement. It was an act of deep, genuine respect. Then something even more surprising happened. The crowd, without any instruction, began to clap. It wasn't loud or disruptive. It was slow, steady, and full of meaning. People of all ages from different countries, all united in one feeling: admiration. The veteran, still overwhelmed, lowered his hand and placed it gently on his lap. His breathing was deep, his heart full. He looked around at the people clapping, then back at the young guard who had acknowledged him in a way he never expected. His grandson, still holding onto the side of his wheelchair, looked up with wide eyes. "Grandpa, why is everyone clapping?" The old man chuckled softly, blinking away his tears. "Because, son, they understand. The applause continued for a few more moments before slowly fading into quiet murmurs of appreciation. Some people wiped away tears, others placed a hand over their hearts. Even those who had simply come as tourists, hoping to take pictures, now felt like they had witnessed something far greater. A few steps away, another guard stood in his usual position. He had not moved or reacted, just as their strict training required. But if someone looked closely, they might have noticed the smallest movement of his jaw, the only sign that even he had been touched by what had just happened. The veteran's daughter leaned down, whispering, "Dad, are you all right?" He nodded, exhaling slowly. "I never expected this. Not in a million years." And though the guards quickly returned to their routine, something in the air had changed. This was more than just another day outside the palace. This was a moment that no one would forget. But it wasn't over yet. Something even more extraordinary was about to happen. The quiet applause had faded, but the warmth of the moment still lingered in the air. The veteran, sitting in his wheelchair, took a deep breath. His heart felt full, his mind flooded with old memories of his time in service. He had never expected such an honor today. He had simply come to watch the royal guards with his family. But now, he had been given a moment he would never forget. His grandson, still standing close, looked up at him with admiration. "Grandpa, that was amazing," he whispered. "Did you know that was going to happen?" The old man chuckled, shaking his head. "No, son, I had no idea." His daughter smiled softly, squeezing his hand. "They saw you, Dad. They really saw you." The young guard who had stepped forward and saluted was now back in his position, standing as still as ever. He did not react to the claps, nor did he acknowledge the crowd's emotions. His face remained calm, just as his training demanded. Yet everyone who had witnessed the moment knew the truth. His small act had meant the world to the veteran and his family. Just as the crowd was settling down, something unexpected happened again. From the palace gates, a senior officer emerged, dressed in a uniform that signified a high rank. He walked with purpose, his posture strong and confident. The tourists quickly took notice, whispering among themselves. It was rare to see someone of such importance step forward in the middle of a ceremony. The officer's sharp eyes scanned the crowd, and then they landed on the elderly veteran. Without hesitation, he walked towards him, his boots clicking against the stone ground. The veteran, surprised, straightened his back as much as he could. His hands instinctively reached for the armrests of his wheelchair, as if he wanted to stand, but his body no longer allowed him to. The officer stopped just a few feet away. Then, in front of everyone, he did something that no one expected. He removed his hat, held it to his chest, and bowed his head. The crowd gasped softly. It was a simple gesture, but one filled with deep meaning. A high-ranking officer was paying his respects, not as part of the ceremony, but as a personal tribute. The veteran's lips trembled. His hands, though weak with age, moved to return the salute one more time. His heart swelled with emotions he could not put into words. The officer straightened, placed his hat back on, and gave the veteran a firm nod before stepping back. He said nothing, but his actions spoke louder than any words ever could. The crowd remained silent, fully aware that they had witnessed something truly special. The connection between soldiers, no matter their age or rank, was something beyond explanation. The veteran's grandson, still watching in awe, whispered, "Grandpa, are you crying?" The old man smiled, blinking away a tear. "Maybe just a little, son. Maybe just a little." And though the moment had passed, the respect, the honor, and the pride would stay with him forever. But the day was not over yet. There was still one more surprise to come. The veteran sat in his wheelchair, his heart still racing from the unexpected honor he had just received. The senior officer's bow of respect had touched him deeply. He never thought that his service, given so many years ago, would be recognized in such a powerful way. His daughter wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled at him. "Dad, I don't think I've ever seen anything like this before." The old man chuckled softly, still overwhelmed. "Neither have I," he admitted. The crowd around them remained quiet, still absorbing what they had witnessed. Many visitors had come to watch the famous changing of the guard, but instead they had seen something far more meaningful, a rare moment of human connection, where honor and respect broke through the strict formality of tradition. Then, just when everyone thought the moment had passed, another surprise unfolded. From the side of the palace grounds, a new group of guards marched in perfect formation. Their boots struck the ground in perfect rhythm, their movements precise and sharp. The crowd turned their attention toward them, expecting this to be part of the usual ceremony. But something was different. Instead of continuing their usual drill, the new guards came to a stop directly in front of the veteran. The officer who had bowed earlier stepped forward once again, standing beside them. He gave a single command, loud and clear: "Present arms." In perfect unison, the guards lifted their rifles and swords in a ceremonial salute. The crowd gasped, realizing what was happening. This was not part of the usual routine. This was a tribute, a personal honor given only on the rarest of occasions. The veteran's breath caught in his throat. His hands tightened slightly on the arms of his wheelchair as he watched the young soldiers before him. They were saluting him. He blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the flood of emotions rising in his chest. It was one thing to receive a respectful nod, even a silent salute from a single guard. But this was something far greater. His grandson, who had been holding onto the side of his wheelchair, tugged gently at his sleeve. "Grandpa, they're doing this for you," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. The veteran nodded slowly. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Instead, he did the only thing he could. He raised his trembling hand and returned the salute one final time. The guards held their salute for a few moments longer before smoothly lowering their weapons. Then, as one, they turned and marched away, their movements sharp and disciplined. The crowd erupted into applause once again, louder this time, filled with genuine admiration and respect. The veteran took a deep breath, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I never thought I'd see a day like this," he murmured. His daughter squeezed his hand gently. "You deserve it, Dad." The young guard who had first acknowledged him remained in position, his face unreadable, yet his small act of respect had led to something unforgettable. And though the ceremony was now over, the memory of this moment would live on forever. But there was still one more part of the day that would make it even more special. The veteran sat quietly in his wheelchair, still trying to process everything that had happened. The unexpected salute, the officer's bow, the personal tribute from the guards. He had never imagined that his visit to the palace would turn into such an unforgettable moment. His hands trembled slightly as he wiped his eyes, not from sadness, but from deep gratitude. He had served his country with pride, never expecting anything in return. And yet today, he had been honored in a way that words could never fully describe. His grandson, still by his side, beamed with excitement. "Grandpa, that was amazing. Everyone was looking at you." The old man chuckled softly, reaching out to ruffle the boy's hair. "I suppose they were," he said. "But do you know what matters the most?" The boy shook his head. The veteran smiled. "It's not about being seen. It's about the respect that was shown today. Respect between soldiers, no matter how old or young they are." His daughter squeezed his hand. "Dad, I think today proved that your service hasn't been forgotten." He nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." Just then, something else happened, something simple, yet just as meaningful as everything before. The young guard, the very first one who had acknowledged the veteran, finally moved again. The ceremony was over, the formal duties completed, but instead of turning away, he took a single step forward, and for the first time, broke his strict composure. He looked directly at the veteran, his expression still controlled but with the smallest flicker of emotion in his eyes. Then, with a firm and respectful movement, he tapped his boot against the ground, a silent but clear sign of acknowledgement. The veteran understood immediately. He had seen that small gesture before, many years ago. It was something only soldiers truly recognized. It meant, "I see you. I respect you. Thank you for your service." A lump formed in the old man's throat, but he managed to smile. He gave the guard a small nod in return. Nothing more was needed. The crowd began to move again, the moment settling into a beautiful memory. Some people still looked back at the veteran as they walked away, their expressions filled with admiration. The veteran's grandson leaned against his wheelchair. "Grandpa, will you tell me stories about when you were a soldier?" The old man chuckled, patting the boy's hand. "I think I just might, son." As the sun shone brightly over the palace, the veteran took a deep breath, feeling lighter than he had in years. Today, he had been reminded that respect, honor, and gratitude never fade with time. And as he and his family slowly made their way home, he knew one thing for certain. This was a day he would never, ever forget.